Hi everybody, this is Jonathan Schrantz. It is very late for me. The kids are asleep, but I'm so excited. I do want to continue this series. I want to get the top 10 most popular Sicilian variations. I'm cooking, I'm in the mood. I want to jump in to number 10 here, the 10th most popular variation. If you haven't checked out part 1, please go do it. But again, just to remind you what we're doing here, we're looking at the variations on Lichess, according to their database, which ones are the most popular, and today we're going to be counting down the top 10 most popular variations. And we're starting off with an accelerated dragon. This is the 10th most popular Sicilian variation. In comparison to the hyper-accelerated dragon, we have this time developed at least one knight, and now the move g6. This could be very similar, so if white just simply follows up knight to c3, we could see just a simple dragon. The reason a lot of people don't want to play the accelerated dragon and they do prefer the dragon move order is because of white's choice now. He can go for the Maraxi bind, and a lot of black players are not going to want to face this. It's known to be a real grind and something that probably should be avoided if possible. However, you never know. Some people do like defending this as black for some reason, so if this is you, you go for it. Live your life. The knight gets attacked, and when he gets defended, something like this. I just want to put a few moves on the board here just to illustrate what white and black should kind of be doing in a Maraxi structure. White's general idea is to keep as many pieces on the board as possible. It will eventually be difficult for black to break out of the bind. So after some castles, bishop e2, d6, there's lots of lines, not here, but later, where sometimes they drop their knights back just to not trade. You can see black even sometimes decides to trade now. But yeah, the basic idea is this is how white structures his pieces. Black will go here. He's going to try to trade the knight and play bishop to c6, and then that'll create a d7 square for the knight. White's going to start putting the rooks in the middle. Usually this pawn will go to b3. This pawn will go to f3. So we can see black trading, and bishop to c6, putting pressure on the e-pawn. After f3, a5 is played. This will help prevents b4, and it sort of secures a square in the future for this knight if necessary. So b3 before black is able to play a4. Now, if black ever plays a4, you can play b4 if you want to as white, and knight to d7. An interesting choice here if you're unfamiliar with this. Normally, this is the dragon bishop, isn't it? White should trade. Well, here it's usually in white's favor to keep as many pieces on the board, and that includes this bishop, and decide where to put these rooks at some point. So after knight to c5, really white has a lot more space, and there's sort of a do-nothing, wait, be patient game that is typically played here. Objectively, it should be fine for black. I don't think it offers that many winning chances, at least at the highest level. So if you do play the accelerated dragon, you have to be ready to meet this. And if you are, go ahead, do it. But if it were me, I'd avoid that one. But hey, I can't speak for everybody. You gotta be yourself sometimes. That being said, let's jump to number 9, the dragon. And the dragon will account for 3.6% of all Sicilians. This is one of the absolute sharpest openings in the game. It's categorized here by the move g6. And of course, there's a lot of variations, but of course, we're gonna be looking at the Yugoslav attack. That's what everybody does. And if you want to refute the dragon, they say you gotta play the Yugoslav attack. Well, what is it? This is a very exciting line where white's gonna play f3, play queen to d2, and castle queenside. Black's going to go kingside, queen d2, knight c6, and now one big decision. You can, obviously, in this point, castle, or you can play the move bishop to c4. They both have immense bodies of theory. It seems like the trend is you can't play the dragon at the highest level, so they say. We've seen Hikaru play it in the U.S. Championship, so yeah, if he can beat people in the U.S. Championships with it, and, then so be it. If you castle right away, which is a very reasonable line, it does allow black this option of playing d5. And, yeah, tremendous amount of moves possible at every turn here. It's been really well studied. You kind of want to know what you're doing. But let's just check out the main line here, which is taking and then taking on c6, inflicting a little bit of damage on the pawn structure. Now, white typically plays the move bishop to d4, not letting black double and also trading off the bishops. And this is a case where white really does want to trade off the bishop because then his chances of a checkmating attack are a lot stronger. So black typically plays e5, which I don't think is the only move. You can see here, sometimes bishop to d4, sometimes knight to c3 are interesting alternatives. But you can go here and now play the strong move bishop to e6, where it's known that taking the rook is a mistake. You'll have to check the theory for yourself. But yeah, now they save it, h4, and the attacks start. White is going to push g4, h5, try to break in at the king. Black is going to have a b file to work with and some active pieces, especially these bishops cutting across the board. Very interesting, fascinating stuff. It's well worth studying. Even if the dragon is just one of those. Even if you don't play it, you got to study it a little bit. It's just a huge part of chess. You really want to know about the dragon. Just watch some games, even if you're not going to play it. I do encourage you to watch it. They get very exciting. And that's just one of the basic fundamental openings everybody needs to know a little bit about. And in this position, bishop to c4 is also played quite frequently, just preventing this idea of d5, and then white is simply going to castle on the next move. The main line here is bishop to d7, castles, and again, everything's been played. There's so many different moves here, and black has a lot of alternatives. But rook to c8, eyeing that bishop on c4, bishop to b3. The typical idea is knight to e5 to c4. Once this knight gets to c4, it's going to force white to give a bishop, and king b1 here has been known to be like a nice waiting move, and then there's some nice wait like rook e8, and there's some waiting moves, but the eventual idea is I checkmate you before you checkmate me. So h4 is another popular idea. h4, g4, we're going in for all these kingside attacks. We trade the bishops, we open up some files, we sneak the queen and the rook in, and we checkmate, checkmate, checkmate. And in black's mind, all he sees is this white king over here. He's going to jump in here, snatch a bishop, chuck these pawns, try to open up the white king, and it's going to be a race. Now, it feels like maybe white is landing just a little bit faster, but there's a lot of nuance, there's a lot of stuff going on, and amateur games, it's anybody's bet. It's whoever's the most aggressive, whoever's the best attacker is going to win these games. It's going to get insane, and it's going to be a lot of fun no matter who's playing. So I do recommend you take a look at it, even if you don't want to play it. I mean, you got to know the dragon, and you got to love it. It's one of the most fun and most exciting openings in the entire game of chess that we play here. So check it out. Moving on, the Moscow attack. So now we'll see something a little bit different. After the move d6, we see the first of the variations where white plays bishop to b5. In this case, it is check. Another popular variation is the Rossolimo after knight to c6, bishop to b5, which we will talk about momentarily. But in this position, people can play here. And you hear, when people play this at the top level, you hear people whine, and it's boring, and black makes a draw. It doesn't have to be that way. There are some interesting ways for black to playing. I think the most interesting, if you're trying to play for a win as black, is knight to d7. Knight to c6 also is interesting. It seems like a weird idea, but it could be played more often than it actually is. But the most common idea is to go here, trade some pieces, and theoretically, there shouldn't be any problems for either side here, but that's not how real life works. Now white decides he could play c4, try to get that Maroczy structure. Nothing wrong with that. It seems like a good idea. Or you can castle and play knight to c6. The reason we took with the queen was to leave the c6 square open for the knight. And among other ideas, c3 followed by d4 is the typical plan. And it gets kind of interesting. You'll notice here, we could play rook e1, we could play queen e2, we could defend our pawn. But most people are actually playing this interesting pawn sack with d4. The idea is, after you take, you now play d5, asking an interesting question of that knight. After knight to e5, you simply play rook to e1. And yeah, if you don't take, then what are you doing here? If this knight moves away, we're going to smash on e5. So knight f3, queen f3, knight has to go back to f6. And we've reached this interesting position where it's just not that easy to move these pawns. One of these pawns has to move to get this bishop out, but you can't play g6. So let me pass the move, c4. You can't play g6 not because of that move. That move's not the problem. The problem is queen takes f6, not only exploiting this pin, attacking the rook, winning the game on the spot. So, like, what are you going to do? People have tried e5, but white can continue to be pesky. After taking, you can play bishop to g5. There's also ideas of eventually playing queen to h3, targeting this pawn. So bishop g5, bishop b7, knight c3, and whenever you castle, queen h3. Persistent pressure. You can't play e5. Not that you would even want to, but yeah, I guess you can play king to f7, and it's just annoying. It's just, there's a lot of annoying pressure, and you can see even knight to d5 is the move. Holy cow, something like this is pretty incredible. So for the pawn, white gets a tremendous amount of pressure, and there's obvious reason why plenty of people have played this way. So yeah, also possible here was h6 when bishop h4, castles, queen h3 is a very similar story. Tons of pressure, and yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting variation. So it's worth looking at, and the good part about having this in your repertoire, if you do decide to do this as white, is you can play the same against knight to c6. The difficulty is if somebody plays e6, you're going to have something else in mind, but yeah. But yeah, if they play d6 or knight to c6, feel free to do that. A lot of very strong players have done it. Moving on. The classical variation. And it's interesting a little bit that the classical variation isn't the most popular line. A lot of times you hear classical, that just means people have played the most logical moves in the game. And here, in a way, we have e4 is the most logical move. c5, I'm actually surprised, is the most common move in this database. I would think e5 is actually probably the most natural, but also a top tier move is the move c5, addressing the fact that white was about to play d4. Knight f3 has to be the most logical move, and now black would love to copy with knight to f6, but then you're running into e5, a move that did not make its way into the database, into the top 20 list at least. But yes, you play d6, so you can play there, opening up, makes a lot of sense. Knight f3, and now knight to c6. That's as natural as it comes. What could be more natural? But this has only been played in 4.1% of all Sicilian games. A fair chunk. The interesting line here, and again, this one, because it's so popular, because it's so natural, because it can be reached by a couple different move orders, the interesting line that we're going to look at is the Richter-Rauser. This has a very popular reputation of being very sharp after the moves e6, queen to d2. We're again going to see one of these opposite side castling situations. And one way to approach it, one way out of many, is bishop to d7, and white decides, will you put the pawn on f4, or will you play f3 with kind of a g4, h4 attack? f4 is the most popular move, and after b5, we can take. And white will argue, it will not be easy for black to castle on the king side, so the black king will probably need to stay in the center, and white can hope to exploit that after moves like taking and f5, trying to create some pressure in the center where the black king is. And yeah, it goes on and on and on. Very, very sharp stuff. It's worth taking a look. It's another one of those big popular Sicilian lines that everybody should know a little bit about. Moving on. The Sveshnikov. So we've seen some of the sister variations of this line so far, but it's an interesting one. And what is very interesting is if you scroll down here, you'll notice Fabi versus Magnus, Fabi versus Magnus, Fabi versus Magnus, Fabi versus Magnus. It's very topical right now. It's a very interesting opening. For a long time, people kind of said this is dubious. You shouldn't really play this. And guess what? World Championship rolls around. We see it in a couple different games. So yeah, not too dubious if you can play this in World Championships. So knight to b5 is by far the main move. And here after d6, not letting that knight jump into the d6 square. The most popular move is bishop to g5. And after a6, knight a3, b5, threatening the fork, we now have knight to d5. And here, most people are going to play bishop to e7. After we capture, they're going to take back with a bishop. And again, c4 is a typical idea. c4 does, however, give away the d4 square, so you have to know that, which is fine. So one idea is c3, with the idea of remaneuvering this knight. It's all about white. Can white keep control over that d5 square forever? And in black's mind, he's thinking, can I get a counterattack? I need to castle, move this bishop, play f5, and start dreaming of attacking this white king. And in the World Championship, that's kind of what we saw. It was kind of like white's positionally winning, but then, the kings are getting in trouble. It leads to very interesting, very sharp positions. Even strong players can make a lot of mistakes in these positions because it just gets insane. Among other moves, bishop to g5, and the idea is if the knight goes to e3, it could be captured by the bishop even, just eliminating some of these knights that are controlling the d5 square. And now a4 is going to get played the most often. We turn our attention to the queen side. We're trying to create some weaknesses over there. After the capture, we can take back with our rook. Black can play a5 after bishop to c4, rook b8, b3, king h8, preparing f5. We got a sharp game ahead of us. White has kind of made a little bit of progress over there on the queen side, but will black be able to get a vicious, sharp kingside attack in the meantime? That's what it all boils down to. So if you're into these interesting double-edged positions, the Sveshnikov is definitely an interesting weapon, and there's a lot of good material out there now about it because of the World Championship that was just played. Moving on, my personal favorite when I play the Sicilian, I play the Taimanov, just like 5% of other Sicilian players. So after d4 takes this move, knight to c6, we're going to get a Taimanov variation. After knight to c3, the idea is to play queen to c7. It's similar to the Khan, only I do feel like the Khan allows a little bit more options to white, even though it's a lot more popular, as you can see. But I've decided to include two lines here just because I love it so much. One interesting one, and then we'll go back to sort of the main one. We'll do the main line first. The main line is bishop to e3. Don't let me forget to go back and look at the interesting line. Let's go back and look at the interesting line. The interesting line is knight d to b5. Sorry, I'm exhausted. I'm out of my mind. It can lead to this very, very interesting imbalance, though. I love this line, so I had to include it. Look at what can happen here. After bishop to e3, a6, guess what white can play? You move that knight away? Nope, not going to do it. And here white sacks a knight. After bishop to b4, the idea is after c3, you're going to trade off for that bishop, right? Knight to c7, and the best move here is actually to sack the queen. So it's queen, and you get the queen for 3 pieces, but white has also picked up a pawn along the way. So white is technically material up, and we'll start prodding with queen to g4. After g6, bishop to b5, it'll be cemented with a4 soon. White's going to castle, and you get this insane position where it's a really weird endgame. Black will play like d5, get a nice solid pawn there, use these bishops, and try to get some action against the white king. And it's very interesting. It's a very interesting endgame. I do like facing it, so just because it's fascinating. But bishop to e3 is what most people are going to play, and that seems very sensible. So now's the time for a6, stopping any knight b5 shenanigans. So after queen d6, knight f6, castles. The most popular line for a long time was actually bishop to b4, but the recent trend is actually to play bishop to e7, where after f3, b5, again, we're going to get one of these opposite side castling situations. I do want to point out one interesting line. After g4 takes bishop to b7, there is, after g5, knight h5, a very interesting tactical moment here that occurs in most of the games. Bishop to e5, offering the bishop. So this can come as a shock if you've never seen it before. But the idea is when we take check, white can pick up this other guy. And after we get our pawn back, we can trade off some of the pieces. And white will argue, I have some activity, but it's a very interesting endgame. Yeah, the king has a little bit of work to do. We probably have to play g6 or even g5 to get this king out. And we're probably actually also going to play like bishop f6, usually taking this knight, shattering the pawns over here. But what that also means is white's going to possibly play a4, and if we take, they get this pass c pawn. A lot of interesting complications. A fun endgame, worthy of some study if you do play the Taimanov. And there's a ton of interesting lines in the Taimanov, and it's a personal favorite of mine, so I do recommend it as black. That being said, the Rossolimo. This is another one of these bishop to b5 Sicilians, and I do want to just point out 2 of the variations here because we're starting to get into the main stuff now. This is 5.6% of all Sicilian games. You see this at the top level all the time now, And whenever this knight goes to c6, I just think in my head, oh, they're going to play bishop to b5, aren't they? And yeah, this just happens all the time. Black usually decides between e6 and g6. G6 is the main move. The idea behind e6 is that if they don't capture your knight right away, you have this option of playing knight g to e7. So if white decides to keep the bishop, he's going to probably drop it back somewhere, and you're going to get a position where, yeah, we trade some pieces, and it should be decent for white. I do like this structure in general for white. There's the 3-on-2 versus the 4-on-3, but this is on the queen side. White will be able to get a lot of pressure, especially if the other bishop gets on to the queen side here. Black, for his part, will kind of unravel the pieces. It's known to be fine for black, possibly trading, bring the bishop to c7, bringing some of the pieces in. You get an interesting endgame. Possibly white's slightly better, but it's a playable line for black, which is why we see it quite a bit at the top level. g6, this is the choice of some very good players. Maybe you've heard of this guy, Magnus Carlsen. He has been doing this routinely now for a long time, even in the World Championship. So we've seen quite a few examples of this. One idea is after the captures, just pay attention mostly to the pawn structure. This is kind of a typical pawn structure for what you're going to see. And pay attention to any Magnus vs. Fabi games. These guys are experts at this stuff. So white says, I shatter you. I double your pawns. Black says, I happily accept the 2 bishops. If my pawns, I can never get rid of them. I'll be doing great. And you're going to have this long strategical maneuvering game where pay attention to these knights. This is actually the typical structure that you can get as white. You're just stopping c4 from ever happening so you can't get rid of that doubled pawn. And watch these knights go. Knight e2, guarding some squares. Most importantly, f5, but I guess technically this one too. And queen here is a typical move. Watch where the other knight goes. Bloop. Plop both your knights back. And you're going to have a long strategical maneuvering game. So a lot of these top guys, that's what they're into. They want to have a long game where they might get some chances later on of outplaying their opponent. So if that's what you're into, this is the kind of opening that you're going to want. Not as sharp as the dragon, not as sharp as some of these Sveshnikovs, but if you want a slower, more maneuvering game, which is perfectly fine, this might be the way that you want to play with the white pieces here. And a lot of players are, you want to play Ruy Lopez's and stuff with white, and then they hit you with a Sicilian. So it does make sense that a lot of people actually have this in their repertoire. Now, this one is the most shocking to me personally. 6% of all games are the con. I mean, come on, people. This move's outrageous. Ridiculous. I think the con actually allows white quite a bit of flexibility. So it's not my favorite. And I might just be saying this because I'm a Taimanov guy. So I have this fake feud with con people. But I do want to illustrate some of the points here of this opening. If you want to give your opponent a lot of options and then develop your pieces, it seems like pretty logical because you're going to play like b5, knight f6, bishop to c5. And very often you're going to get a lot of attacks in a lot of the lines. I do want to point out some of the possibilities. One of the reasons I don't particularly like this is because you allow the Maraxi again. So something like this would be very typical for the position. And we're going to get sort of a hedgehog. And black can play this way if they want. It's not my style, but hey, some people like hedgehogs. If you like hedgehogs, that's one of the lines that you might want to play. And if they instead just play knight to c3, I think this is like the super most logical way to play, right? That's just, you're just playing normal chess. You probably will at some point need to play bishop to d3. And yeah, again, I just feel like even though you got this typical Sveshnikov, should be slightly better for white. But I just want to point out that if you do play this as black, you need to be ready for basically every setup. A Sveshnikov setup, a Maraxi setup, and the main line, which is actually this move, bishop to d3 right away. So after bishop to c5, black will now decide you can retreat or you can go back. Most people actually go back to e7, which is the safest, staying over there by the king. And the point, though, is you move this bishop too early, you get hit with queen to g4. Still, this has been played by many good people. So if you're into this, you feel free. Live your life. I don't like it. Just not for me. Not how I would play as black. But you do you. But really, this is a truly stunning statistic to me. 6% of all Sicilian games. Cannot believe it. Moving on. The Alapin. Now here is A very logical move that probably should be played. Is it fair to say the second most popular opening could be played more? Probably not. But it's a very logical move. c3. And this is like one of the first times we're not looking at knight to f3 or knight to c3. c3 is like the real interesting one. And the idea is simple. You just want to play the move d4. And this has been played in 6.8% of all Sicilian games. That's 32,000 in total in this database. And I want to point out the two main moves. And just for a laugh, we'll throw in one little opening trap. And the I got this. The c3 Sicilian actually has quite a lot of traps. I can almost make a top 10 best c3 Sicilian traps. I bet there's a lot more than 10. There's a lot of traps in here, and this is just one that I happen to know about because I've seen it before. After d4, not that d6 was the best move or any of this was the best move, but I can't even remember where I saw it, but it's just burned in my memory. So I will show it to you. Bishop to g4 here would be a horrible move on account of d5, where knight to e5 allows the spectacular knight takes e5. And it's very similar to the elephant trap, where after they take, there's bishop to b5. And yeah, this is kind of the dream. Wouldn't you love for something like that to happen? Okay, not going to happen too often, but I will just point out that there are plenty of traps abounding in this opening. So if you play against people that don't know any theory, it's very dangerous. If you do play people that know a lot of theory, it's probably around equal, which is not necessarily a reason not to play it. I mean, every opening is equal after all, but the two main choices are d5 or knight to f6. Knight to f6 is actually the most popular move. I've always preferred d5 when I play this way as black, so I'll offer them both to you. This, after e5, knight to d5, you achieve sort of an Alapin position where that knight's hopped around a little bit, and after d4, you can actually play knight to f3 first. Notice that you can't take this pawn because then the knight would be hanging. So after knight to c6, c takes d4, d6, white will usually play bishop to c4 before moving on with the bishop, often getting this isolated pawn and hoping for a dangerous attack. So you see this all the time. It's really an interesting opening that more people should play. I still don't know if that's fair, but I do think it's a good one that more people could consider. The c3 Sicilian. The other line, of course, after c3 is d5, and after the capture, you take back with your queen. You can now play d4, and I like knight f6, knight f3. Most people are playing bishop to g4. My personal preference is actually to play e6 because I'm a French player at heart, and this guy, he did something to me a long time ago, and I love to trap him in. But I can't talk about it here on the air. Now's not the time. But this is the main line, and yeah, you get some normal position where, again, white is accepting the isolated queen's pawn in order to get some very active play, and it's going to be a very dynamic and interesting game from this position. And this is just sort of the main line. There was a whole bunch of lines that are missed. There's a huge body of theory. There's actually a c3 Sicilian book that's about this thick. So, I mean, there's a lot that's going on here, a lot that we can't cover in today's lecture. But yeah, objectively, if you memorize one tome of literature, it's probably equal for both sides, but that's not a huge deterrent. It's a very interesting opening, and you can get some exciting chess, and most people are expecting the open Sicilian, so feel free to shock them with the c3 Sicilian. Now, for the main course, the Rolls Royce of all chess openings. I think a lot of people probably know what the most popular Sicilian is. Hikaru Nakamura himself said, if you play the Sicilian, you have to play the Najdorf. That's objectively the right opening. That's what you need to do. So here it is. It has a lot of people that play it. MVL famously plays it. A lot of people at the top level, if they do play the Sicilian, they're gonna play a Najdorf. This is a whopping 19% of all Sicilian games. So this is it. If you want to play what everybody plays, you play the Najdorf. That's the opening. That's the right way to play the Sicilian. Now, I do want to show two lines, maybe more. I can't remember how many lines I put in here. But the main line is actually the English attack, which again, we see this very popular idea of playing bishop to e3, f3, queen d2, and castles. It's against every Sicilian. That's kind of what you want to look at first. And again, black could play a Scheveningen pawn structure, but if they want to keep it true to the Najdorf, they play e5. Again, we're seeing this typical structure where black will be trying to play for the move d5 later on. And after bishop to e6, f3, we will see both sides castle on opposite sides, and the attack will begin. White will throw all of the pawns. Black will play b5, bring all these pieces in, try to get d5 in the meantime, and use all of these aggressive bishops to attack the king. So, yeah, we could go deep and deep and deep. This deserves its own full video because there's so much going on here. In addition to that, there's the English attack. There's also bishop to g5, which is known to be one of the sharpest. And I could show a variety of lines. I do want to mention the poisoned pawn, because this is one of the most fascinating, sharpest, and dangerous openings in all of chess. You don't have to play queen to b6 here. Take a look. There's quite a variety of choices. But queen to b6 is a very interesting line, and most often, white will allow the pawn to be captured, and black's best bet is actually to go in for all this. Now, after rook to b1, there's e5, there's f5. I think people are still playing e5, but yeah, both lines are crazy. Both lead to the sharpest stuff. I don't think this main line is actually the sharpest possible, but yeah, it's very dangerous. There's some captures and g5s, and yeah, you can get a position like this where black is up a pawn. It's a doubled h pawn though, so it's a bit weird. It's hard to judge, and it's been kind of tested out and computer verified. It's a very, very razor sharp, thin line that you need to know and you need to memorize. Lots of concrete stuff. So if that's for you and you do enjoy learning a whole bunch of theory and you want to book up and you want to out-prepare your opponent and know more than them, this definitely is a way to go. It's kind of sharp and scary for black, but again, if you know it better than your opponent, you're going to win because a tactic is about to happen around every single corner. With that in mind, we head back. I do want to show one more line here. Did I mention it? Here it is. Okay, so after bishop to g5, there's this interesting idea after f4. Instead of queen to b6, grabbing the pawn, I just like showing this move b5, the Polgaevsky variation, just because it's kind of amazing. There's some tactics right up front that are nice and fancy. The idea here is after e5, looks like black has kind of blundered a pin here. There's this nice, clever little tactic, and I don't think it's any good for black. But this move, queen to c7, is very fascinating. And you say, what? You blundered a knight. Well, we pick up the bishop over here, and white gets castled. Yeah, it's fascinating, but in my mind, white is highly developed. So I don't know. I'd rather be the guy that's developed all the pieces and castled, which is probably why most people don't play this. And you probably can actually survive with black with perfect play. But yeah, again, it's a Sicilian. You don't play it to play absolutely perfect. You play some interesting stuff, you get crazy positions, and you try to win the game. So that does it. That was the Najdorf. That was the most popular opening. I'm going to bed. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please hit subscribe. That does help me out a ton, so I really appreciate all my subscribers that are out there. And do tell me below, are there any other openings? The Ruy Lopez, French Defense, King's Gambit? What do you guys want? I'll make a video. Maybe we can just do, if you like this, or do you like the more in-depth videos? Let me know what you want. I'm going to probably do a variety of both in either case. But what kind of other videos would you like to see a top 10, top 20 video of? And yeah, I'll help you out. I'm there for you. So have a good night. I will see you guys later.